Compliance is a profession where people work tirelessly to make the world a better place. And there are hundreds of amazing and inspiring women who have helped the field develop into what it is today. Great Women in Compliance is part of the Compliance Podcast Network, so join Mary Shirley and Lisa Fine as they talk with women in compliance who are making a difference.
Welcome to the Great Women in Compliance podcast with Lisa Fine and Mary Shirley. I'm Mary Shirley, and today I'm super excited to be debuting a new feature for the Great Women in Compliance podcast, and that's introducing you to the bonus episode series. Now, what is the bonus series, you may be asking, dear listener? Well, it's a special category of podcasts that we bring in subject matter experts who do work and have skills, knowledge, and experience that align with our major goal of advancing women in compliance professionally and sometimes personally, though they're not in the compliance or tangential fields themselves. So you'll notice that traditionally we interview women in compliance and occasionally gentlemen. And these bonus episodes are really targeted at specialists who have something very expert to offer in the area of advancing and empowering women. So I would like to introduce our first bonus episode guest today, Mel Stanley. Mel, welcome to the show. Would you like to introduce yourself further for us, please?
Hello, Mary. Yes, wonderful to be here. So I'm based in the UK. Mm-hmm. I've spent most of my career in advertising agencies, some big network agencies such as WPP in London, working with some UK and global clients. Many of the brands are household names. So I know my way around branding, and it's what I would put down as my core competency, if you like. But after about 20 plus years, when I moved over into the corporate sector, I started to realize that the advancement of women was much slower in the corporate side than in advertising. So I don't know whether it's the same in the States, but in the ad agency industry in the UK, there are actually many female CEOs and group CEOs. I would say it's probably easily 50-50, if not 60-40 in their favour. Wow. Mm-hmm. So I came from a culture that really had many role models and and inspirational women leaders who we could follow into a more corporate culture with a board that was white and male and mostly over 50, with one female, generally in HR. And I was quite surprised at how the more senior, unlike advertising agencies, the more senior, the fewer females there were. And during my time at my last role, I joined a board called Smart Energy Great Britain, which was about the introduction of smart meters. And off of that, got involved with a company called Women on Boards, which is a global network promoting board-level diversity. And some of the stats for that I found quite horrific when we were talking about FTSE and global index companies, that some of whom didn't have a woman on the board, some maybe had 2 or 3 in specific disciplines, and that the target was 30%, to have 30% on the board. And it seemed to me pretty low. But I could absolutely see how this was possible with, the patriarchal society that we've had in play for so long, the situations with women who leave to go and have children, the glass ceiling, we'll talk a bit more about that, as to how there just wasn't the opportunity there for women. And I started to think about, why that might be the case, and came to the conclusion it was less about competency, because we all know lots of very brilliant, very talented women. Right. And it wasn't about lack of ambition either. It seemed to be more about confidence and profile, because women tend to fear and shy away from self-promotion. And I think that's partly because we've been brought up not to be pushy, because it's not ladylike. Ambition in women is aggression. And I think that's where, many women have thought, it's not my place to really go for what I want and self-promote. And that's where personal branding comes into play. So what I'm doing now with my company, First Woman, is I'm combining my marketing and brand skills and applying exactly the same principles that I've applied for years to big company brands to individuals, specifically women. So what are your values? What's your purpose? What are your goals? And what's your story? What's your USP and your strengths? What are the things that you can authentically promote so that you don't come over as being just flaky and pushy? And that's what personal branding in its best sense, it's all about, refining the individual and authenticating them rather than manufacturing them into something that they're not.
Great. I love that. A lot of that really resonates with me and reflects the various work environments that I've been in, across multiple countries. So advertising sounds very unique. And I'm glad that we have you here to share some of your expertise in this area because as you indicated, and it's something that we touched on a recent podcast, women typically sort of struggle to leverage their relationships that they've made through networking as well as men do. They tend to be good at building relationships, but not so good at leveraging, and that kind of asking for favors or self-promotion is considered, almost a little bit tacky. And so I love the fact that even though we shouldn't be considering it as tacky, your personal branding technique's probably not the right word, but focus helps people who feel like it's uncomfortable to speak up and draw attention to themselves overtly. So here's a way in which you can do it and everyone can see it, but you're not making a literal song and dance about yourself.
Absolutely. This isn't about creating an advertising campaign for you. It's about emphasizing the strengths and emphasizing what you're really good at and putting yourself in a position where you are asked to take on projects or given opportunities without having to go and fight for them, because that isn't the female way. That's definitely the where men tend to excel, and that's, I think, just a gender difference.
Absolutely. Well, so I really can't wait to get into your personal branding subject matter expertise. But before we do, I wanted to add a little topic to our lineup today. I saw that you had you recently held a really interesting conversation on the brick ceiling with some ladies that you invited to speak with you. Will you share some of the information about the brick ceiling and your insights from that experience?
Yes, so Shattering the Brick Ceiling was a podcast I did to try and bring a different perspective to how women of colour are finding it difficult to succeed, and the specific challenges that they have in addition to being women in the workplace. So the brick ceiling was a phrase that one of my guests used. She's quite a young, but nonetheless, she's on an upward trajectory. And she referred to the brick ceiling as being, if you think it's difficult for women to break the glass ceiling, then it's doubly hard for black women and BAME women to be able to do that, because not only do you have the gender issue, but you also have the colour issue. And the workplace is often frequented, certainly white-collar workplaces are often frequented with white people. And as we've just discussed, in senior positions, white men. So becoming part of that is a tough ask. And the real insights that came out from that conversation, and it was a fascinating conversation to hear their perspectives and how they had been influenced over the years by their families and the directions that they had taken, but also through their sheer tenacity and resilience to get to where they've got to. And the key insight was really around that they don't They really want to be part of the collective. Whereas at the moment, Michaela, she went to university and she was one of the only Black women and only Black people in her course. And Rashida is the only Black woman in her company. Ananya, who's is a vice president at CACI, which is a big global tech company. She's of Indian descent, and there's 4 in that company. And what they want to be seen as is their reputation to be based on merit. And we all talk about, it shouldn't be anything to do with skin color, and it absolutely shouldn't. But they want to be part of the collective, so that it's not, this is the Black person in the room. This is my brilliant Black colleague. This is my brilliant colleague who happens to be Black, and that's it. There is no difference. But we're a long way from that yet, simply because we talked a lot about opportunities and where the opportunities for women of colour starts. And, there aren't enough women of colour in the roles in order to build the numbers and build the momentum. So at the moment, whether these women like it or not, they are trailblazers. And the other thing they feel is a huge amount of pressure to get it right, because they don't want to ruin the opportunity for all of those Black women coming behind them. So there's a lot of pressure on them to get it right. There's a lot of pressure on them to succeed. But ultimately, they've all done so by embracing their true self and learning what is acceptable behaviour. I mean, Michelle talked about, she used to go into work on occasions with her hair in an afro, and people used to come up and touch it. And in the beginning of her job, she was terribly uncomfortable about that, but she let that happen because she didn't want to appear bolshy or aggressive. And now she won't accept that because she started to embrace who she is, and her colour and her hair and everything that goes with that is part of that. But, it's not some freak show where she's there to be looked at. So it's fascinating how they've overcome the things that, more than just being a woman, more than just competing in a male world, they are also competing as coloured women in a white world. So it's, but it was really positive, conversation, hugely positive. And that's what I wanted to get out of them, because with all of the activism around Black Lives Matter, which is absolutely, relevant, at the same time, there are women, ordinary women, we're not talking about Beyonce, we're not talking about president nominates here. We are talking about ordinary women in the workplace who are being successful despite being women, despite being Black. And I think that's really inspiring.
Absolutely. And so, Mel, for any of our listeners who are keen to hear some of the first-hand tales from that podcast episode, how can they find it?
Well, it's on my LinkedIn page. Under Mel Stanley, so
great.
Feel free. It's also on, which might be a little easier, on my LinkedIn First Woman page. So the links are there, and there are also some really animated, fun audiovisual outtakes there where you can get snippets of the conversation and the people in the conversation.
Super. That sounds great. Thank you for sharing that with us. All right, so for level setting purposes, as we go into the personal branding topic now, will you help to establish some baseline knowledge for us on what personal branding is? And I know you gave us a great little summary just a little earlier on, and what it is not.
Yeah. So, if you Google personal branding, you'll get about 8.5 million results. So there are lots of definitions, there are lots of perspectives, and I think it's difficult to come up with a if you like a unique expression of what personal branding is. But my own preferred explanation, which is a summation of a lot of things, is your personal brand is a holistic representation of you. So it's a 360 of you, entirely you, all of you, warts and all, nothing missed out. And in that respect, it can't be overinflated if it's rooted in the real you. There is a lot of talk about personal branding and Instagram and how people create and manufacture personal brands. But, we're not talking about a Kim Kardashian version of you. We're talking about who you really are as a person, characteristics, personality, experience, strengths, values and drivers, all the things that make you tick, all the things that you hold dear. And that's what builds your personal brand. And, people buy people. And authenticity is a key part of that. We've all met individuals who we take a instant dislike to, or people you meet and think, I could really go out and have a glass of wine with her. Mm-hmm. And you don't know why you immediately create those impressions and have a connection or not, but you just do. But there's some HBR research that said that we all create impressions in about 7 seconds. Mm-hmm. And that is, those are framed by our own experience and heuristics. Our lives, where we were brought up, how we were brought up. Lots of things contribute to those impressions that we create very quickly. And so, 7 seconds, that's not even enough time to say hello. And every person does it. We're all told not to judge, but unfortunately, we're mentally wired to do that. Right. So having a really strong, authentic, personal brand enables you to be able to get past that the first impression that you create is the one that you want to create. Mm-hmm. And there's lots of ways of doing this in terms of understanding in a very succinct sentence, for example, what your elevator pitch is. If you're in a networking situation, how do you introduce yourself? Your handshake, all of those things, whether you're smiling, all of those things create that first impression. And of course, reputation, which is a big part of personal branding. So, what people say about you, not just what you say about yourself, that can be curated out of your personal brand. So your reputation is something that, the message you land is something you want to land, not a spurious impression that's or perception that somebody has created of you. So personal branding needs to be built, not created. And I use the definition, because building means it comes from you, created sounds manufactured. So it's built from everything about you as an individual. And believing in that gives you extreme confidence. And, confidence is very important. It's one of the most attractive features of any individual. So what it's not is an arrogant act of self-promotion, because there are lots of ways of promoting yourself through personal branding without it being really overt and tacky. And, women shy away from that, I think, anyway. We suffer a little bit from the likability factor. We want to be liked. We don't like offending people. And so we worry a lot about what people think about us. We worry about being judged. A lot of us suffer from imposter syndrome, which is a much touted subject. So, we see this idea of talking about ourselves, presenting ourselves, promoting ourselves as being, not something that's particularly polite. And we need to get past that, because if it's rooted in who you are, in your authenticity, I said it's about perfecting yourself, authenticating you. It's not about curating something that is some high profile persona of who you'd like to be.
It's not contrived.
Absolutely not. And, if it is contrived, that's when, you get found out. We all know people who we would term flaky. because there'll be one thing one day and something else another day. And having a personal brand is about consistency, and that's exactly the same as marketing. It's about consistency. So your behaviours and your decision making is all wrapped up in who you are, and that's what I'm known for.
Wonderful, great explanation there. Thank you for being so clear. So this brings me now to why is personal branding so critical for us to take stock of and work on as much as any other professional development aspect?
So I think having a personal brand and being known for something, so having a reputation for something positive, that it allows doors to be open for you. It creates opportunities. So in the world we live in at the moment, certainly with the COVID situation, if people are finding themselves either on consultation or at risk of redundancy, you need to have something more than just competency and ability to do the job. That becomes a hygiene factor in a market where there's lots of competition. So having a personal brand establishes your credibility. It means that when people are talking about you, they're saying the right things. It helps grow your network and expand your reach. So there are lots of ways that you can use your personal brand. We'll probably talk about LinkedIn later and other social platforms, but there's lots of ways that you can communicate your personal brand, which will give you a competitive advantage beyond just a list of experience and expertise and skills. So, branding is a function of what you say and what you do, and what you say and how you behave establishes all of that, which is why your brand is absolutely key. And in having a strong brand, when I say about new opportunities, again, as women, we tend to sit back and we hope that all the good work that we've done will be recognised and we will be justly rewarded for it because that's, fair. It just doesn't happen that way. So having a strong reputation and a good brand means that, in a sea of others, you will be selected as somebody to take on a new opportunity or to be promoted. Mary can do that. She's a creative inspiration. We'll bring Mary in on that project because she knows how to get these things done. That is the strength of your brand. Now, if you are invisible, and nobody knows who you are and what your strengths are and the value that you bring to the table, then you will be overlooked. And so that's one of the real credible reasons to have a personal brand. And so all of that then enables you to reach your personal and professional goals, to be able to do the things that you want to do and to be able to plan ahead. And if you look at how you can communicate your brand and create a proper comms plan to do that, then you can start to reach out beyond your network and set yourself up for other opportunities in the future. And in a company, companies benefit from people having strong personal brands within them.
Yes.
People who are who represent a company and are known as being really credible individuals, that's great for the company's reputation. And it's great for employee engagement as well. So there's lots and lots of benefits from that. But in terms of, there was one example very recently that I talk about with a lovely lady who's American called Dory Clark. And she's an absolute icon. And she recently wrote a post which was essentially about personal branding for women. And she talked about how the likability factor. And I've been on one of Dory's courses, so I'm kind of connected with her on LinkedIn. And I shared her post. And I added, a couple of sound bites of my own. And 4,000 people read that post. And they read it because she came back and said, "Thank you, Mel, for sharing."
Oh, amazing.
Now, this woman has got a gazillion followers. And, but that's what she does. She responds to everybody. And because that's who she is and that's part of her brand. And so when she responded to that, and I honestly, I was just basically adding a bit of value to what was already a brilliant post that she had written. In her responding to that, she opened her network to me. And I got lots of views from people who I've never, ever been able to attract of my own. So this idea of connecting with people who can open doors and help you is really, really key in getting your brand across and getting your message out there.
Yeah, you know what's interesting? I don't know Dorie Clark. I haven't spoken with her or read any of her things, but I have at least 2 other people in my network who are in close contact with her. And even though I've never been exposed to her, I already have a sense of her being a real subject matter expert in her field and being a trailblazer. And so even though I've not met this woman, her personal brand is already in my mind. Isn't that incredible? And that's the power of it, right?
Absolutely. And that's what it's all about. So, you know, if 10 years down the line, you've been curating your brand and getting out in the right places with audiences that you want to be able to connect with, all of a sudden, as you say, you may never have met the person. You may never have connected with them, even on a platform like LinkedIn, but you've got an impression of them. And that's what this is all about. But it's got to be the right impression. It's got to be something that you want out there. But she is she's a really good example of somebody who walks the walk. She doesn't just say her purpose is to share her message and help people. She really doesn't. And I think for that, I don't know whether she has somebody respond to all of the people who comment on her posts. I can't believe she's got the time to do it all herself. But even if she does that, good for her.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mel, you mentioned something that I am very much in agreement with, which is that when you have individuals in a company who are very well regarded, especially in their respective areas of practice that they do in their core role for that business, that's a positive for the company, right? Because it helps to show that there are true subject matter experts. This company hires good people. They hire the best in their field. Yeah. One of the things that I've observed, and I have myself been, I'll just use this word loosely, a victim of it, and is if you go to an effort to do something beyond the realm of your core job, and as you know, we've got this podcast, sometimes colleagues are unduly harsh to those individuals. And based on my experience hearing about this from others, I only know of women who have been in this situation where if they are some kind of high profile, they speak a lot at conferences, they write books, they do a lot of social media posts and become well known, that this can actually cause them troubles internally with colleagues. I don't know the root cause. I would guess in some cases it might be jealousy, in others it might be that they feel shown up by the person, right? If someone's doing more than you, so I heard this quote once about how you will never be criticized by someone doing more than you. Which I have found to be largely true. So what is your advice for these people who have, done the right thing in terms of they're volunteering their own time outside of work to focus on their work-related interests, which have in turn positively built their brand perhaps externally, but are suffering a little bit internally? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? Because, I mean, that kind of, I would say, the individuals, as you say, maybe mostly men, feel threatened by that behaviour. But it comes down to what I said, a short while ago, that it's not a behaviour that that women are expected to demonstrate. We're not expected. We are expected to go beyond. We are expected to do more than is necessary. But as long as it fits in a box that is viewed as acceptable, and My one thought on all of this is the thing about personal brand, or indeed anything, is People don't have to like you. They don't have to like you. They don't have to like what you're doing, as long as they respect you. And it's, it comes back, not everybody, it's this likability factor. Not everybody is going to pat you on the back and say, great job done. That's amazing. Especially if that puts them in a difficult position and it's viewed as a threat. But that is not a reason to stop doing it. If you are working in a culture that allows that kind of behavior in response to somebody who's making an effort to do some, a bit more, especially if it's in pursuit of the gain of the company, then, that's where cultural change needs to happen. And I think when many women that I've talked to about developing their personal brand is when we look at deep-seated values and what's important, that can often lead us to find that where we're working doesn't really sit with where we want to be and isn't really going to get us where we want to be. And that we're battling with a pervasive systemic bias within a culture that, as an individual, we can't overcome. And that's why networks in big companies are so important, because you can develop this circle of trust and you're not alone in combating that. But I definitely do not agree with bending to the will of the culture. If it becomes unbearable, leave and find another job where you will be valued, where your actions aren't going to be deemed as threatening or unacceptable or pushing. Leave, and take your value to the benefit of a company that will embrace that. And sooner or later, these old traditional corporates, they're going to have to get with the flow. They're going to have to wake up because times are changing. And we're seeing this everywhere, aren't we? In politics and not just in daily life. So never put up with a culture that doesn't value who you are and what you do.
Thank you, Mel. That is solid advice. I'm going to make sure that this episode gets in front of some of my associates who need to hear that right now. Thank you. You talked a little bit about social media before, and I'd love to dig a little deeper into this. What part does social media play in this exercise of personal branding?
Well, I think it's huge because it's, obviously, the face-to-face side of personal branding, is fairly obvious. Every meeting you go to, your personal brand is on display. Every time you're introduced to somebody, your personal brand is on display. But if you want to build something, a platform to launch your brand off, if you like, then social media is a good place to do it. And you can also do that, and kind of start there and dabble in it and test things and see what works for you in a way that you can't necessarily do in a face-to-face situation. So it's the first thing to do is I always think it's worth Googling yourself. It's something that many people don't do. But if you put your name into Google, what comes up? Because there might be, for example, lots of Mary Shirleys out there, and they might all do different things. But the very least that you'd expect to see is a Google link back to your LinkedIn profile if you are a professional in a business. That's the very limit that you'd want to see. But how you portray yourself on LinkedIn, how you portray yourself on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and all the rest of it, you need to really understand what outcome you want from those platforms, because they all operate in slightly different ways. So I always think of LinkedIn to be seen and to be read, because I think LinkedIn is a great platform for sharing points of view, professional expertise and content. Twitter, people tend to, because of the limit obviously on the characters, they either do these 3 or 4 posts, one after another, or they share articles. So Twitter's a great place place to get thought leadership within the professional environment. And Facebook, well, Facebook is a big connection platform, and there's lots of businesses and people who run their businesses off of Facebook. But, the important thing of all of this is to keep it all consistent. So, with Instagram, which is all about, it's very visual, it's very lifestyle, it's very much about being seen. When we think about personal brand on social, we need to look at how do I want my personal brand to be consumed on each of those platforms in the way that those platforms are best optimized. So, for example, you never release thought leadership on Instagram because it's not about that. But the consistency is absolutely key. And I have a concept called, shall I call leaky identities, which is where you appear as one thing on one platform and something else completely different on another. And that might be because people tend to have a personal life, if you like. We all have a personal life, but a personal profile, if you like, and then a professional profile. And that's great. But then if somebody Googles you and they get something, an impression completely different on LinkedIn from what they do on Facebook, then, you're putting yourself at risk as appearing inconsistent. So how you work social platforms to portray your personal brand is really, really important, because, we are just that search engine away from being discovered. And if you want to separate them all out and still, put your holiday photos on Facebook, as we all do, make sure you've got your privacy settings sorted so that what is seen about you in the public domain is what you want to be seen. And it won't be detrimental to your brand.
Perfect. Okay, that sounds good. Any thoughts on how often we should be posting and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so if we think about LinkedIn, which is, the professional network of choice for many people, there's tons of examples of how to use LinkedIn best, but LinkedIn is something that needs to be nurtured. It's because it is a community and it is a network. So the way the LinkedIn algorithm works is the more you post that is relevant to your profile and what you're posting, the more likes you get, the more comments you get, the more they will post your stuff. And that's how the algorithm works broadly. So if you are completely invisible on LinkedIn, so maybe you're an observer who just likes to look at stuff and read stuff but never comment and never post yourself, you can't suddenly launch into LinkedIn and start producing stuff and expect it all to be read and noticed and commented on. It doesn't work like that. And that's why it's a nurturing process. So I think with LinkedIn, you don't really need to do more than a couple of posts a week. And again, if you think about a comms plan as you would for a brand, one of those might be an article. One of those might be a repost with, a couple of sentences with your perspective on it. One of those things might be a share. You don't always have to be writing great big documents to post on there. But just a couple of posts a week, and always use hashtags, because hashtags, again, open you up into other groups. Always tag a company or an individual if you are referencing them. And always think, whatever you're putting out there, how is that going to be consumed? Am I going to be perceived in the right way by putting this content out there? So always put yourself, exactly the same as classical branding, always put yourself in the shoes of the person you're trying to connect with. What are they going to take from what you're putting out there?
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. That's great advice. Thank you, Mel. And that's all we've got time for in this first episode of this 2-part series. So we look forward to continuing our conversation with Mel. Keep a lookout for it launching soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Great Women in Compliance. We hope you'll join us in honoring the great women in the compliance field by subscribing to this podcast and leaving a review.